Okay, so over the past week or so, I've been trying to up my game in terms of texturing, lighting, in particular with Octane. So tonight I'm going to talk about some texturing stuff with Octane. So let's get started. First thing is I went through several tutorials. There are a number of different resources. Learn Squared, Greyscale Gorilla has some excellent Octane tutorials if you're a member there. Silverwing on YouTube, absolutely great. Anything you can find from David Ariew that's on YouTube. And he's done some stuff for iDesign and School of Motion. That he has a lot of good stuff there. He also has a class from School of Motion that is not a live class in the sense that it's not a guided class where you have a TA and so forth. It's at your own pace. It was a guided class, and now they stopped doing it after this semester just ended. So let's first start by looking at this was the when I was working on the Learn Squared. So I brought in this model here. I'm going to look at the node editor, and it's going to look like scary if you're not used to this. But, okay, and I should say this is the old way of doing. We're going to talk about how you can change it. So basically what we do here is we mix 3 different materials, or 3 different things. Yeah, materials. Because we're using material mixers. You have your edge, you have your surface, and you have your butt. Let's have a look at this. So the difference is in how the way a mixed material works is, or a mix works and then a mixed material. A mix will take 2 textures and then something to moderate between them. And a mixed material works pretty similar. You have 2 materials rather than textures, and you moderate between them. So this is our final one. So this is the edge mixed with the stone surface. So here's our edge, and basically we have a albedo and a bump. Now what I should have done, and also a gradient to adjust the color. That's the whole point of the gradient. I made it a little lighter. And the other thing you can do is you can do a projection, and very often things will look a little bit better with a box projection, and you can try it. The other thing that we'll talk about is the transform edge and the surface, and they mix together to form one material, and then you mix in I think this is really the crevices. Now the way it was done is they have this dirt node, and depending on how the normal is set, if you invert normal, it's the edges. Let me see if this is and this one is not inverted, so that will give you your crevices. I believe that's how it works. And you put this whole mix together using a diffuse texture, a bump, maybe a roughness, and ultimately becomes this mix of an edge, a surface, and a crevice. And what you get is you get something like this, And as you can see, when you have a look at it, as you can see, the crevices, you can see stuff on the edges. This was probably a bit too much for this. They used an eagle, I think, or a statue. That is the stone. That is a stone material where you're mixing edges and you're mixing your edges and your crevices with a base material. The next thing that I did is a marble material. And you can see you have like this marbling here, and you have, now this was the lighting, a little rim lighting there. And you also, it's not that visible here, but marble, of course, is porous. So let me show you what this material looks like. Again, we go to basic and look at the node editor. And you got, yeah, a little, this is your medium, which is your scattering. It uses I used the universal material, which is relatively new. But you can see I put in the albedo, and then I put in the roughness, and then a normal map, and then this is what gives you the kind of transparency effect. And you have scattering and absorption, this describing how the light will pass through this. And that is necessary for marble to get that slightly, kind of like with your hand, where if you stick a light to your hand and you can see thicker parts and thinner parts, and the thinner parts light will pass through. That's what this medium node does. And you could, the scattering, so you can change the density. You can, now here I gave it different absorption colors, scattering colors, and you can make some adjustment here. These are simply RGBs. Like I said, I have a roughness and I have a normal. And again, you can adjust the size with the transform and change the projection. So sometimes you have a texture that does not fit the model, and that's what the transform lets you do. If you have a huge model and a texture that's tiny, you can make it bigger, or vice versa. You have a small model and the texture's way too big, you can change it with this, changing it here with this aspect ratio. Okay, this is the projection that we changed to box, and you can adjust that as well. And by adjusting these things, you can get it to, you know, looking how you want to look. So the structure is, you in this one, you have your main, your universal material, and then you plug in various images that will give you essential albedo, which is your color. This does not have specular or metallic. Your roughness, your normal, which can give you a bit more of a texture. And again, for your scattering here. One other thing that is interesting is, the other thing I did is do a color corrector, because this was actually blue. And if you want to change, you know, I desaturated it and played with that a little bit. So that's how I got this texture. Now, we talked about the old way of doing the stone, which was this, the new way. I can show you a little bit of how you would set up something similar in using the new composite material rather than, because what happens with the mix is that you have to have all these other materials lying around that's part of the mix. Well, composite, let me bring this up. Notice you have right here. So you have this composite material. Now, I tried to do kind of like what I was doing with the stone, where I had 3 different things I wanted to mix. And the first 2, it's easy. Well, you have your whatever you're putting in that determines, because what you have in here, let me bring this bigger. In a composite, you can have displacement, but you can also, for each material you have a mask, and it shows essentially how much of the material you want to see. Well, if you're trying to mix, or you have 2 materials, what you can do is simply have one material be masked and then the other with the inverse. So they'll show the opposite thing, which is the same thing, is in essence having some kind of, mix between them. The other thing, I had the third one, said, well, how am I going to do this? Well, what I ended up doing here is the third material, which is going to mix this with these 2. I simply created the mask using a mixed texture. I mixed this texture in to the mask of the other 2 textures. And you can also control it, in addition, control this mix if you want to. And so that can control the amount of, you see this is green now. I can control this color, how much of the green and how much of the blue and red. If I go down here, I get purple. This number, this is I'm not using image maps, I'm just using floats. This controls the amount of blue versus red. So if I change that, see, and if I change that, that'll be red, like almost entire, it'd be purple, and if I went out to 1, it'd be red. So that's how you can adjust the balance between these materials in a composite scenario. So you would have one image map, could have the one image map controlling the edge, and the other controlling the crevices, and you can bring them together by these relationships by using a mixed material. Now notice also here we have submaterials. The submaterials are basically materials that are going to stay within the material. They're essentially local materials, as opposed to in the previous example where we had this, let's see, this is so instead of, this is how it was, where you had these materials here that you're mixing are separate materials, and they're kind of, can be confusing and perhaps even kind of confuse you can see, so you have all these other materials running around that you have to, contend with, be aware of. You can see this is all the purple, if you bring this all the way down to green. But essentially you have all these other mixed materials that are hanging out, kind of making things more confusing. the beauty of this composite material is everything is in there. You don't have to, you're not having all these other materials that are kind of clogging up your list of materials here. You know exactly what it is. It's in one place, as opposed to you can say, well, which is the mixed material I care about? Turns out it's this. So you have to, obviously you can make it clearer with naming, but it's just easier. This is just much easier and cleaner than the old method of doing things. So if you look again at this, see, I should have the stone. You can see you have stone final mix. So now I know, because I have the surface, the edge, I have these three materials here. And not just this one, actually four, because the mix is its own material. So you can see 1 versus 5. And if it gets more complex, you can have more. And you can mix as many things. That's the beauty also, is you can mix as much as you want in a composite material. So you're not limited to three things, and you can set up whatever kind of mixes that you'd like, whatever kind of materials you'd like, and in any amount of influence. Again, I'm using floats. Generally, as you saw in the stone example, you use mass of some kind of noise, something that will give an interesting texture, which is the same thing also as the your marble here. If you look at this again, see, these are all textures. And again, this is actually blue, but the color corrector. One thing that's interesting that you can do is you can solo nodes, and then you'll see just the impact of that node, which if you're trying to look at stuff and figure out, it is, you can see it immediately. So I can immediately, if I go here and I hit D, I can immediately see what my marbling pattern looks like. And you can see it's blue. But if I go here and I do the same thing, you can see now it's gray. So you can see what's going on. You can look at different things. You can look at what's this normal map going to look like. There we go. So very useful in trying to build your textures. So it's not as scary. Once you start doing it and you look at these different kinds of textures, depending on what you're trying to do, there are a lot of tools to mix and match different colors, different textures, different things to make stuff look interesting. Now, what are you trying to do? Well, in this case, you're trying to get a marbling. In other cases, you may try to make edges or certain parts of something look worn. It was very interesting. One of our assignments in the class is we had to texture stuff for a headphones ad, including the headphones, and that was like the big thing that they'd be looking at. The problem in the examples they'd give when they went over stuff, both the instructor and Mr. Ariew, is they were doing all this worn stuff and, chip stuff and all that kind of business. The problem with it, if you were making an ad for something, you are not going to want to make the product look bad. So while you don't want perfection, right, the reason we do this, the reason we put roughness maps and normal maps and all this stuff is because perfection is not reality. I mean, even when you take something out of the box for the first time brand new, it's not perfect. And the minute you start using it, you got fingerprints on it and all the rest of it. So that's the key to texturing, is understanding, and why you can't have perfection, and how much lack of perfection you want depending on what you're trying to do. Obviously, an ad, you want to minimize it, just make enough so it's realistic. Whereas, maybe you're doing some kind of dystopian scene where it's going to be, you want things that are destroyed, rusty, or this or that. So that, and of course the examples here, we were looking at edges with the stone example. Now, as you can see, you still get, and this is probably a little too bright, but you see you still get your shadows, and you get a little darker in the crevices here, and if the light's hitting an edge, you'll see the light here, or you'll see if I can find an example here where an edge is darker. See, yeah, this doesn't seem to give you the dark edge. This is maybe a little bit too bright. The other thing that we're going to get into next time, I really want to talk more about lighting and rendering, is how you get that, once you have your texture that you like, how do you light the object? How do you get it to look well? And actually, you may want to light without worrying about the texture, because then you can actually see the contrast of light and dark and so forth. But anyway, that should be it for now. And I thank you for watching. And please, if you want to see more, please subscribe. Really helpful to get a thumbs up. And I will speak to you next time. Take care.